Welcome back to Monster Tamer, a 2D Pokemon-like RPG created for Phaser 3. Previously, we worked on fixing a few bugs in our game, and if you missed the previous videos, there'll be links in the video description to the source code up to this point, as well as the complete source code for this video. There'll also be a link to the previous videos if you'd like to catch up, so let's get started. Alright, so now that we addressed some of the bugs in our game, before we add new functionality, we're going to go ahead and take a quick break, and we're going to review some tools and helpful utility functions that you can use while building your game. So to see some examples of what we'll be doing, the first one we're going to take a look at is a library called Tweakpane. And this library offers a variety of utility functions for designing your own GUI, and you can bind data to it, and then that way your web app is reactive to when these data changes. And the data in the GUI as well will also react and change when the data in your app changes. And so the app itself allows you to add all kinds of UI components for monitoring different things. And so you have simple things like your numbers, your Boolean strings. You can do things with colors, and so you have hex colors. You can do points, so you have a 2D point, and so you can move things around, and much more. And so to see an example of this in this test scene here, this is a simple GUI that was built using Tweakpane. And so inside here, we can move game objects around by interacting with our panel here. We can play various attack animations. We can move them around so we can position them. And so we can also add our own custom buttons and react when those buttons are clicked. And the data is also reactive. And so you can move objects in your scene and you'll see they'll update on our panel. So in addition to Tweakpane, we're also going to look at how we can add in some utility functions that will allow us to position our game objects. And so with this utility function, we can use the built-in events of Phaser 3 to detect when we drag an object in our game, and then we can go ahead and report and update that game's object's position after we've dragged it. Alright, so these next few videos, what we want to do is we want to focus on the tools themselves and how we can use them to enhance our development experience. And so, to get started, I'm going to go ahead and share some links in the description of this video that's going to have some starter code for building up this test scene, as well as the code or dragging our game object around our scene, and then we'll go ahead and review it and get a better understanding of how it works. And so to go ahead and get started, what we're gonna go ahead and do is let's come back to our code. And what we're gonna do is first we're gonna go make a new test scene. So under our scenes folder, let's make a new file. We're gonna call this test scene.js. And then what we're gonna do is under a utils file, let's make a new file. We're gonna call this draggable.js. And so in the description of the video, there's going to be two links of code. The first one will be for our test scene. And so this is going to be some boilerplate to get us started with our test scene. And so if we can go ahead and copy that, we'll go ahead and paste that into our test scene file. Then what we'll do is in the second link, there's going to be some code to the draggable function. That's going to enable us to drag our game objects. So we can go ahead and copy that source code and let's paste it into our draggable.js file. All right, and so for the time being, we're just going to work on getting our test scene set up, and then we'll come back and review this code once we start diving in. So what we're going to go ahead and do is now that we have these two files, the next thing we need to do is we need to actually grab the Tweakpane library. All right, so the next thing we need to do is we actually need to go ahead and add Tweakpane to our code base. And so to go ahead and do this, there's going to be a link in the description of the video to the Tweakpane website and the Getting Started page. And so on the Getting Started page, there's going to be a few ways you can go ahead and install and use this library. And so it is a library that's been built as a module. And so to use it, we have to go ahead and use modules in our code. And so our game is already set up to do that. So luckily, we can just go ahead and import the functionality we want from the minified file, and we'll be able to reference it. You can also, if you prefer, you can download the JavaScript file, the minified version, and then include that in your code base. And if you ever do update to use npm, you can also install the library that way as well. So what we're going to go ahead and do is we're going to use the module that's hosted on our CDN. And what we're going to do is we're going to follow the pattern we've been establishing for our other libraries. So what we'll do is we'll come into our lib folder and we're going to make a new file. And let's call this tweakpane.js. And what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and copy this line of code here to go ahead and grab the minified file. And so instead of just importing pane, what we're going to do is we're going to do import asterisk, and we're just going to do import as Tweakpane. And what this will do is this is going to give us the full default, this is going to give us the full export of that library. And then what we can do is we can do export default, and we're going to go ahead and do Tweakpane. And right now this is going to work only because this library has been built as a module, and so we can go ahead and import this from the metafied file this way. All right, and then one last thing we're going to do is we're just going to go ahead and ignore our error message for our importing of Tweakpane. Primarily our TSC, when we're doing our compilation of our TypeScript and our Java and our JS.code, it expects the references to be our local file paths. And so because this is a URL, it's just causing some errors, and so we can go ahead and ignore it. All right, so now that we have our Tweakpane library, the last thing we need to do is we just need to connect our test scene to our existing code. And so what we're going to do is let's go ahead and jump over to our scene keys file. And we're just going to go ahead and add our new scene. We'll call it test scene. And then let's go ahead and jump over to our main.js file. And so then that way we can include that in our phaser configuration. And so let's go ahead and come down here. Let's copy and paste. Let's go ahead and change this to our test scene. And we'll go ahead and import in our class. And then finally, just to bootstrap so we can get started faster, let's go into our preload scene, and we're going to go ahead and go straight into our test scene. So now if we go ahead and save, if we come back to our code, and so we'll go ahead and we'll see we have our basic test scene set up with our background and some of our game objects. All right, so now we have our basic templates set up and working for our test scene. What we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and review some of our code so we can just have a better understanding of what we've added. And so what I'm going to do is I'm just going to close a few of our files, and we'll come back to our test scene. And so inside our test scene file, this is just a very basic phaser scene. So we just have a new class that extends our phaser scene. And so what we've done is add some properties to keep track of some of our game objects in our scene, as well as to keep track of some of the data that when we add our GUI, we'll need to keep track of what's been selected. And so we have game objects for our various attacks, our slash and ice attack. And then we have our phaser image game objects for both our enemy and player monsters. And so basically when we initialize our scene, we're just picking one of our selected attacks. And so we're just going to go ahead and start with slash. And then what we do in our create method is we just create a very basic setup of what our battle scene looks like. And so all we've done is we used our background component to go ahead and create our simple forest background. We've created just 2 image game objects and set them up in their initial positions. And then what we've done is we called this make draggable method to go ahead and make our game object draggable, and we'll come back to that. And then we've created our 2 instances of our attacks. And then finally, we've called a new private method called add data GUI, and right now this method is blank. And so this is where we're going to add in our functionality for our Tweakpane GUI. The last thing in the file is this method for update attack game object position. And what this method is going to be used for is as we update some of our values in Tweakpane, depending if it's X or Y selected, we're going to modify our game objects and move them around our scene. So right now, for our attacks, they are hidden, and that's why we can't see those game objects in our scene, but these are just the same game objects we used in our battle scene. All right, and then besides that code, we have our draggable.js file, and we're going to come back to this later, but basically this is just a function that we provide a game object to, and we make that game object interactive so we can move it around our scene. And so we'll dive back into this once we cover this code more in depth. And so for now, we're just going to go ahead and focus on our Tweakpane first. All right, so besides those 2 template files, all we did was just make a new scene connected to our game like we've done our other scenes, and we set up our preload scene to go ahead and start this immediately so we can start testing. All right, so one other thing we did, we also did add the Tweakpane library to our code base. And so one important thing to note is at the time of the recording of this series, what's the supported version is 4.0.3 of Tweakpane. So there's going to be a link to this exact URL in the description of this video. And so later on, if you're watching this video, there might be newer versions of this library. The one that's supported is this version here. And so you'll want to make sure you reference that inside your code. All right, so now that we have our basic template in place for our test scene and is connected to our game, that actually brings an end to this video. In our next video, we're going to start taking a look at the Tweakpane library, and we're going to start building our first GUI, and we're going to go ahead and connect that GUI to our game objects in our scene. So as a reminder, there's a link in the description of the video to the complete source code for this video, and as always, thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed the content. If you did enjoy the video, Please consider liking the video and hit the bell icon to be notified when the next video in this series is released. For more great Phaser 3 content, please see the links on your screen now.